Hello everyone and welcome along to another live stream for this week, and today we're looking back at the dramatic events of the weekend at the Bahrain Grand Prix. Not so much dramatic in terms of the actual race itself, but of course the misfortune that befell Romain Grosjean on track early in the race. But I'm joined this evening by Luke Murphy. Welcome along, Luke.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Yeah, how about yourself?
I'm all good. I'm just wondering whether you got over that initial shock that I think everybody got when we saw what happened on lap 1 in Bahrain.
It's still quite difficult to fathom just how much of an escape he had at the race. It was, you can't help but fear the worst when you see the Formula One car veer off into the barriers and then just become a complete ball of fire. It's even these fiery retirements you don't really see very often, just because of the improved safety measures and just the kind of fail safes that the power units have and things like that. So it was far more spectacular than what we've really been used to in recent years, but it was certainly a relief to see him walk away from the crash very quickly, I might add, and with the aftermath of all of this, you see all the updates coming through, the videos from Romain, the messages from his wife, and you can't help but feel a little bit of emotion come over you as you kind of realize that he's had this escape, and he was very close to leaving behind his wife and kids, and it's still, it's that situation is going to weigh heavily on Formula One for a little while, and it's. Yeah, I mean, what do you think? Have you kind of come to terms with, the gravity of it all?
Yeah, it's one of those ones where you see the events unfolding on screen and you can't quite reconcile in your head that if that crash had happened in 2017, which is not a long time ago, Romain Grosjean was dead. Romain Grosjean would have died yesterday on track, and it would not have been a very pleasant experience in any ship for anybody. I think it would have been an absolute tragedy for his family. It would have been a tragedy for Formula One. It'd be a tragedy for the world. Romain Grosjean is a really, really nice guy. He's a top sportsman, regardless of whether you think sometimes he's a bit crazy on the track, because let's be honest, yesterday was another example of Romain Grosjean's sometimes lack of spatial awareness early in a race or in wheel-to-wheel combat. There's no doubt the accident was of his own making, but in terms of the crash itself and the violence, and it's just was very hard to get over the initial shock of it. And I'm glad that we didn't see any footage of it immediately, apart from the distant live shot that we got at the start of the race. And then there was a 3-minute wait on the on television to actually see. Sorry, my cats are fighting in the background. But I think those few minutes were an eternity, and I have to say, well done to Stuart Morrison from the Haas Formula One team. Most of the teams run WhatsApp groups for written media and accredited media, and I'm in that group, luckily, and Stuart Morrison was very quick to update everybody. I think he was a full 2 minutes ahead of the television when he said Romain's out of the car, Romain's in the medical car, so we knew he was okay and we were able to report on that, and then the television cameras obviously picked up on the fact that he was in the medical car. So yeah, as I was saying, if that crash had happened in 2017, Romain Grosjean was dead. Marion Grosjean would have been a widow today. Their children would have been without a father, and it would have been an unbelievable tragedy. But I think it's worth highlighting just how good a step forward in safety the Halo has been. Grosjean himself was one of the main detractors of the Halo before it came into Formula One. As head of the Grand Prix Drivers Association, he made it clear that the drivers don't want Halo. We don't want Shield. We don't want Aeroscreen. We don't want anything like this. And those comments, I think, have come back to bite him. And I think he'll welcome that, because obviously we saw his admission from hospital yesterday that the Halo is the greatest thing to have been introduced to Formula One in his lifetime. But is there any doubt in your mind, Luke, that Halo saved his life yesterday?
Oh, no doubt, absolutely no doubt whatsoever. It's, if you for whatever reason, if you still needed some kind of justification for the Halo before last weekend's race, then there it was. But we have seen examples in the past where it's proven life-saving. We've the most notable incident was the crash at the 2018 Belgian Grand Prix, I believe, which was where a car went over the top of Fernando Alonso's McLaren. And
sorry to interrupt for a second. Down in the bottom right, you'll see footage that the FIA have supplied of the stock footage of when the Halo was introduced and the Halo being explained. But in that footage, it actually shows the crash you're referencing with the Halo of Charles Leclerc being scraped by Fernando Alonso's McLaren. So the Halo has proven its worth in the past, but yesterday was the icing on the cake. It has definitively saved a life now at this point.
Yeah, and I believe, I don't think fans should really be asked, or I don't think there was ever really a need to try and justify it to the fans. I know it's an entertainment industry, but fans should never have the right to determine how much risk a driver takes in Formula One. It's it was akin to sort of gladiator style thumbs up, thumbs down for whether they live or die kind of verdicts. And it was to me it's that kind of thing where if you look back on this sport in when historians look back on the sport in a few hundred years time, they're going to see us cheering on people risking their lives in these open cockpit race cars, and they're going to think Jesus, what barbaric people were these, and we have to realize that sport has to become safer, and we have to always pursue that, because ultimately we don't want anybody to die in a Formula One car or be injured or anything bad happen to them.
No, and that's the thing about yesterday. Obviously, Jules Bianchi died in 2015, 9 months on from the crash in 2014 at Suzuka, and arguably the Halo wouldn't have saved him due to the nature of the crash he went through. But that crash was the catalyst that made the FIA hurry up the introduction of the Halo. I know it had been looked at for a few years anyway. Some form of cockpit protection had been looked at for a few years, with Henry Surtees dying at Brands Hatch in 2009, Felipe Massa's accident at the Hungaroring in 2009 where he picked up head injuries. And I know they were looking at, should we introduce the Shield style one, which has actually been shown on the screen right now, with Sebastian Vettel testing it. But there was the Halo being tested, the Aero screen, which IndyCar has adopted for use in America. But the Halo came in. It obviously met with quite a lot of detractors, people saying we don't want it, it looks ugly. And I'd be one of the very first to stick my hand up and say, I wasn't a fan of it in terms of the looks of it. I wasn't against its introduction. I always thought F1 should introduce something that works to keep F1 open cockpit yet protects the drivers' heads. Because when you look back at a race now from say 2017 or earlier, it's amazing how vulnerable the drivers' heads look all of a sudden. The cars look naked without it. It looks like there's something missing. And I think it was a major step forward when it was introduced. And I know some of the more gung-ho drivers, some of the more the drivers who think that they have to appear to be macho and all like that, I think they just wanted the cars to be kept as is. But I think looking at the perspective of now, when we see that, say, Charles Leclerc escaped head injuries, Sean Gelael at Barcelona last year in Formula 2, and now we've got this with Roman, where Gunther Steiner has said he has looked at the wreckage of the monocoque and he said, without doubt, the halo has saved Roman Grosjean's life. Roman says the same as well. And it is absolutely terrifying to think that if we went back to 2017 and the exact same crash happened, we're only going back 3 years, but the exact same crash happening, and Roman Grosjean would now be dead. And that's a very sobering thought.
Definitely, completely sobering, and one that I don't really want to think about, and should only really be thought about for the purpose of pursuing further safety measures. And what I will say is I don't think they anticipated the halo being used for the purpose of protecting against a deforming guardrail. I think that's now showing that the Armco barrier is what it's known as. It is maybe starting to look a little bit outdated as a sort of a track edge, track perimeter, outer limit, track boundary, really, should I say? And yeah, and I think for such a high speed incident, I'm not gonna sit here and say, oh, there shouldn't be a barrier there in the first place, because nobody would have pointed that barrier out and put an asterisk for it to be a dangerous point. But I think maybe one of the next things maybe to do is to have a look at the kind of wider boundaries of the circuit and see what can be done for when a car does leave the track at high speed and there's no tyre barriers or Tech Pro barriers, or maybe just for Formula One put Tech Pro barriers everywhere. I don't know what the solution is. There's going to be far cleverer people than me, but it was really surprising to see these barriers just deforming and parting. Granted, it was around the halo, which was a brilliant way for it to deform. That's the ideal solution, but I don't think anybody expected a car to be kind of plunged that far into a barrier in the first place.
No, the circumstances of the crash obviously were a freak accident, but that is generally the nature of how these accidents happen. A particularly unique set of circumstances arises, and it's generally a perfect storm of these circumstances to create bad circumstances. So in this area, Formula One got lucky in that the monocoque, when it went through the barrier and it twisted up under the barrier, and the barrier actually enclosed over Roman's cockpit, that he wasn't fully enclosed. If that barrier had actually enclosed him over the cockpit more, he would have been trapped in the cockpit, unable to get out, and he would have been stuck in the flames, which would have been unimaginable. But luckily, the barrier had only twisted over the right-hand half of the cockpit overhead, so he was able to get out over to the left-hand side. And there are images circulating on social media where you can see the gap through which Roman had to escape was only half the size of what he would normally have. So he was lucky in that regard. At some point in the crash, his steering wheel disappeared. he doesn't know whether he took it out himself by instinct at some point in the crash or whether the force just sheared it off the steering column. But at some point, the steering wheel got out of his way, and that was another thing that he didn't have to worry about. The steering wheel got out of his way, and just in general, I think there was elements of luck involved, but obviously the engineering prowess that Haas put into their monocoque, the FIA's safety standards that they put in. There's been tremendous work done. The legacy of Professor Sid Watkins, the late Charlie Whiting, who oversaw safety for the FIA, as well as his duties as race director for Formula One until his untimely death. But these guys, the legacy they've created and the 70 plus years of history, the 52 fatalities that Formula One has had in the past, they all culminated yesterday. All that accumulated knowledge and experience and the progress that's been made, it all came together in a perfect set of circumstances yesterday. And it worked out. And I'm so very, very happy for Roman and his family that he was able to walk away. And I think he will be the very first. Roman's a smart guy. I think he will be the very first person to acknowledge that even 12 months ago, he wouldn't have been walking away as unscathed as he is. I saw there was a point made on Twitter earlier on today where even the fire safety standards for the overalls that he was wearing, the actual overalls have had their exposed flame time doubled for 2020. It was something the FIA introduced only this year. It went from 6 seconds to a minimum of 12 seconds exposure to flame. And then the undergarments that they wear in their balaclava and all, that was another 5 seconds. So that gave Roman 20 seconds ability to be exposed to those flames without injury. And he took slightly longer than 20 seconds, which is why he picked up minor burns. But if he'd been wearing his 2019 overalls, he would have only had about 10 seconds to escape. So he would have been exposed to those flames without protection for over 10 seconds. In the space of 12 months, that's the progress that was made. That's incredible and coincidental and a lucky one.
Absolutely. And it's these little things that you don't even think of that the FIA are pursuing in the background. And, I don't doubt that they're probably trying to keep bringing the limits higher as well in other aspects of it. And yeah, it's the whole thing is a testimony to the FIA and all the work that they've been doing, and not just the FIA but all the kind of all the consultants, all the engineers, anyone associated with the safety and well-being of everybody within Formula One. It's a testimony to them, and they should be very proud of themselves after this weekend.
Yeah, the one thing is though, the other crash that happened just like an hour later with Lance Stroll, when he got flipped over and the car came to rest upside down, he struggled to get out of the car with the halo there. So I think that'll probably be the next weakness that really has to be addressed. It's what if Roman's car had ended up upside down at some point in his crash? The halo would have made it considerably more difficult to actually escape. So while it has saved him on this occasion, it could very easily have gone a completely different way. And I think this is where the never-ending pursuit of increased safety is going to come into play, because that is a weakness that us, as people without the resources of the FIA, if we can identify that as a weakness, surely the FIA will, and they will have to come up with solutions for that.
Yeah, definitely. It's a never-ending push for improved safety standards, and yeah, as you say, you'd like to think that they've taken a look at it and are trying to think of ways in which a driver can extricate himself even quicker. Maybe, I don't know, just off the top of my head, maybe just increase the height of the rollover hoop somewhat, so that it kind of opens up the angle of exit just a little bit more. So if you've got the hoop a bit higher, then the car will be a bit more rolled over to one side. So maybe that's an exit method like that. That's just something off the top of my head, but I'm sure there's other ways you can maybe reprofile the halo somewhat, hopefully give it the same kind of strength rating for a different profile, different shape of it. Um, yeah, so you'd like to think it's something that they've clocked, um, and can hopefully bring something that will aid that.
Jean-Jacques Smith has sent a message saying that he says there's a shot where they showed the damage on the front part of the halo. You can see where the carbon was destroyed for a section and where the metal inside was. So that stopped the barrier from injuring his head, and that made the cabin turn. So it's hard to get out of, but not if he had gone straight through, definitely killed. And yeah, I think that's... Everyone watching yesterday, I think, knew that. And that's why I think there was such a relieved round of applause when the replays were finally shown. I think everyone knows just how close we came yesterday to utter disaster. And do you think, we obviously know Roman is going to be sitting out the race this weekend in Sakir, but do you think he'll come back for Abu Dhabi? Or do you think he'll just go, right, that's it, I've had enough? If he's fit to race in Abu Dhabi, do you think he'll want to?
I think he'll want to, yeah, and I think every driver wants to kind of end their career on as big a farewell as possible, but at the very least they like to complete their last full Grand Prix distance, hopefully a points finish or something like that, depending on kind of which car you're in and what kind of state your career's in. But it'll be something that I think Roman will want to do, and I think I'd want him to. I think it'd be good for him to come back for his farewell race. It's obviously I wouldn't want him to come back if he doesn't at all feel like he's ready. I know he doesn't have an awful lot of time to get ready, but it's I wouldn't blame him if he decides to step away altogether. But I think there's got to be a bit of him inside that does want to just not have his career ending in a possibly in a life-threatening crash.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you because he's supposedly discharged from hospital tomorrow. The burns on his hands are being treated and they're responding well to treatment, and Haas have released a statement to say the prognosis is that he will be discharged tomorrow, which will give him 9 days to be ready for practice for Abu Dhabi. Obviously he's sitting out this weekend. Pietro Fittipaldi is filling in for him. We'll get on to that in a few minutes. But next week in Abu Dhabi, I would expect Roman. As you say, I think he'll want to come back and just be able to wipe that slate clean and put it all behind him so that he can put in one final race to say goodbye to racing in Formula 1 for 10 years. Roman has been a memorable driver over the last 10 years. He's had his highs, he's had his lows, arguably more lows than highs, but Roman is a very, very quick, competent driver. And I would like to see him get a point or two to say goodbye, but that's pretty unlikely. And this is where I think that maybe the mature elder statesman side of his brain might kick in. We know Roman is like the most family orientated driver on the grid, married to Marion for 7-8 years now at this stage. He's got 3 kids. Constantly he writes cookbooks with his wife, and he's a very settled, grounded fella, very, very nice guy. And I just wonder whether he'll go, just because it happened to me once doesn't mean it can't happen again in the same car, just because there is that possibility. So I'm just wondering whether he'll make the decision, enough is enough. I'm not risking my life for P17 in a Haas. I'm just going to step aside and let Pietro Fittipaldi presumably, kick off his young career. Because what is there for Roman to gain apart from maybe a little bit of nostalgia further down the line? I suppose that, as you say, I don't know whether his legacy means more to him than possibly the ability to go home to his family. Because even though it's unlikely to happen again, there is still that possibility.
There is. I will say that I think, you know, you'd probably have the same thought about the Sakir circuit, but Abu Dhabi is feels weird saying it, but Abu Dhabi I think is probably one of the more safer venues to race at. I mean, it's got to have been custom built with Formula One in mind. It's not like an abandoned piece of tarmac somewhere that's repurposed to make a racing circuit. It's a purpose-built FIA grade one from
Sterile desert wasteland circuit.
Yeah, yeah, in a less polite kind of way of putting it, but yeah. So I don't know. Maybe that might play on his mind. There are certainly circuits you'd maybe deem to be less safe or prone to more adverse weather conditions, for example. I don't know how much of a factor that will be. It was just one of the kind of things that I thought of when trying to weigh up a swan song race at Abu Dhabi.
Well, I hope that he is able to be physically recovered enough that he gets the all clear to race, and I would like Roman to have a proper race to say goodbye on. I think we say goodbye. He is not going to be racing in Formula One next year. It's almost certainly the end of his Formula One career, unless something absolutely bizarre happens. But I think Roman deserves a proper send-off, and I hope that he gets the all clear to do that. That's the problem with these double and triple headers. There's just not quite enough time between the races in the event of something like this happening for recovery. So hopefully all's good for next week and he'll be able to say goodbye properly.
Fingers crossed, yeah.
But this weekend, Pietro Fittipaldi, he gets to make his debut in place of Roman Grosjean. Günther Steiner has already confirmed him. Under the circumstances, not ideal. He hasn't actually even driven the 2020 car before. He's tested for Haas in 2017, 2018, 2019. He's their test and reserve driver, but he's never driven the 2020 car. It's going to be a very, very tough ask for him this weekend.
It is, but Pietro doesn't really have anything to lose by taking the opportunity. So, it's widely believed that he's not really in the running for a seat next year anyway. So, it can't do him any harm to have a bit of a run out, and if he's able to get at least close to Kevin Magnussen's pace, then it'll, I don't think it'll do him any harm. They've certainly had enough time to assess him. As you say, he's been with the team for a good few years. He's had a good couple of test outings with them. So yeah, it's good to actually see, an official reserve driver being used for the purposes of being a stand-in driver. And like you say, it's not obviously not ideal circumstances, and he'll probably know that. And but best of luck to him. It's not as if it's a too hard a circuit for him this weekend. It's not going to be one of the more technical laps.
No, it's very much keep the foot planted, really, isn't it? The Sakir circuit this weekend.
Yeah. It's it is probably one of the nicer ones for him to be flying an F1 car around. So yeah, best of luck to him.
Yeah, he probably won't enjoy having a Ferrari engine down those very long straights. But yeah, as you say, best of luck to Pietro Fittipaldi. He hasn't got a stellar junior record, or but that means there's just no expectation on him. There's no hype on him. There's no pressure on him under the circumstances. So I hope he just is able to go out there, have fun, and do the best he can. It's a Formula One appearance was pretty unlikely for him anyway. So the chance to actually get out there in a Formula One car and take part in a race, it's pretty cool for him. So best of luck to Pietro. But
you you talk about the low expectation. He does have quite a famous surname, which a lot of fans will probably recognise
Yeah.
and and associate with being bloody quick. So yeah, maybe a bit of casual viewer expectation there.
Yeah, the name is all that really connects him to glory, though, because his junior record really isn't anything special. There's a Formula V8 3.5 championship in there, but apart from that, um, pretty nondescript, really. So,
He was quite quick in that. It wasn't it wasn't a narrow victory. From memory, he was the standout driver, but it was a depleting field at that stage of the Formula 3.5
no,
V8.
and let's not forget, this is how Kamui Kobayashi started his career. He didn't have a particularly great junior record. He came into Formula One to replace the injured Timo Glock for Toyota at the end of 2009, and he was brilliant. And all of a sudden, he's a full-time Formula One driver and became one of the most lauded, crazy drivers there was. He was brilliant. So you
And a
never know.
successful sports car driver afterwards.
Yeah,
Very
I think he's
successful.
won a few big races, hasn't he, Kobayashi?
He's won a few. He's not quite got the Le Mans victory that I think he's deserved over the past few years. I think he might still be the lap record holder for Le Mans
Yeah.
a couple of years ago, but yeah, very successful career. So yeah, who knows? Maybe Fittipaldi can um,
Launch something special this weekend.
yeah.
You just don't know, do you? But I wanted to move on to talk about the replays. And this caused quite a debate yesterday all over social media. And basically, the crux of the argument, there seem to be two camps regarding this. Obviously, the live footage went out where you didn't see anything happen on screen with Grosjean's crash. The live footage didn't show anything apart from the cars coming back to the pits. And then once they knew Romain Grosjean was okay and safe and he was in the medical car, then they started to show, live footage of the scene, the burning car. And then shortly after that, then they started showing replays of what actually happened on track and the crash and the violent nature of the crash. And there was some graphic images in there. You saw Romain Grosjean on fire. You saw a man fighting for his life and obviously in pretty distressing situation. But after that, there was obviously a bit of backlash. Daniel Ricciardo was very outspoken about it, where he was saying that Formula One was treating it like a circus and they shouldn't be showing these replays, especially when the drivers are trying to get their head back into racing mindset for the restart. Sebastian Vettel, family man as well, he was saying that he didn't want to see these replays, and there was some shots of Vettel looking, pretty, that 1,000-yard stare with the footage being shown on the garage screens. But I got a bit of backlash on Twitter after for saying that I disagreed with Ricardo, and that I think that once it was established that Romain Grosjean was okay, that there wasn't an issue with showing the replays. What's your stance on showing the replays, Luke?
So I think everybody's of the mindset of as when the massive crash has happened, quite rightly, do not show anything until we have some kind of clarification about the driver being okay. I think everyone's kind of on the same mindset with that one. But in terms of the replays afterwards, I think we're we're all hungry for knowledge, and we all like to know the facts and to know somebody's okay. From a human perspective, we want to you know we want to know um, how much danger this driver is actually in. Even if it's to see how close he came to a much worse result. So I think there is a natural curiosity from everybody, and I think nobody can really kind of get on or even refocus until they've seen um, at least a replay or one or two replays, and I think that's just part of the human kind of mindset, and I think it would probably help. It helps the drivers as well. In my opinion, obviously, I'm not a driver, but I think it's helpful to know somebody's okay or know the circumstances of the crash. Um, yeah, just for the purpose of kind of okay, that's that, and this is, I can put that to the back of my mind to a degree. So I can understand the replays being shown a couple of times. However, for me, I remember, looking at the coverage and thinking that this might be a bit much now. It was a bit like they'd been given this kind of green light to just keep showing it and analyze and overanalyze and it sort of became the kind of filler for um, when a big incident has happened on a 24-hour news station or something, they can't quite piece together what's happened, so it's all just kind of also speculation and and initial reports and things like that. It was a bit like that, and it it was for me a bit much because nobody just really once we weren't going to get all the facts in the kind of it within the hour after the accident. Really, we weren't going to really determine much, so why keep reliving it? It's just slightly
You felt it was over the top.
over the top. It was, yeah, for the purpose of, it was almost seemed like it was just filler for the broadcasters, and and to me that I kind of agree with Daniel Ricciardo in that it eventually it just felt a bit cold, a bit multi-angle action replay kind of.
Yeah, no, I get what you mean. The argument I would say is that it's obviously a defining moment of the weekend of the race. The race has been delayed for an hour because of this incident. Roman is okay, and the commentators were very quick to keep saying that upon replays and saying that. I know David Croft on Sky constantly said when a replay was being introduced, he would constantly go, and just a heads up, Roman Grosjean is okay, he's out of the car, but the footage you're going to see is quite hard watch. I think Ricciardo, I can see both sides of the argument in terms of the replays, but at the end of the day, Roman was basically completely uninjured in the accident. And I think I used the example of Michael Schumacher's crash at Silverstone in 1999, which by comparison is, it's a pretty nondescript accident. It doesn't look like anything too crazy. But when you look back at Schumacher's accident at Silverstone in 99, he broke his leg, his season was curtailed, he missed half the year. But you look at the crash and there's nothing particularly unusual about it. But just based on that, Schumacher's crash resulted in injuries that were far worse than what Roman Grosjean has today. Now, obviously the nature of the crash to look at is a lot more graphic, it's a lot more distressing. Seeing a human flailing around on fire isn't pleasant viewing. But it was the reality of the crash and the heroism of the rescue team, the medical crews. I think that needed to be highly visible. I think that's one of the positives that came out of yesterday's incident, just how good the response was from the doctors Ian Roberts and car driver Alan van der Merwe. They're heroes. And along with the Bahraini track officials as well who came along to help, I think that should be highly publicised and that should be shown on all television screens. I think the the strength of the chassis that Haas have created, the safety levels that the FIA have created, I think all of that needs to be highly publicised, because it shows the engineering prowess and genius that has gone into this and has kept Romain Grosjean alive. And the family were aware of the situation and they'd been told that Romain is okay. So I personally don't have a problem with the replays being shown, but I can see why other people would. The only question is then is, where do you draw the line in terms of the graphic nature of a crash? If the driver walks away, is it still a graphic crash?
Yeah, in my opinion. It's, I totally agree with what you were saying about highlighting the heroes of the people who rushed to Romain's aid and were, playing with fire, almost literally, to help him out the car, and yeah, I agree. Put a spotlight on that, but it, I don't know, I'm struggling to kind of describe it other than it just felt a bit much. Like, we must have seen the big fireball a dozen times, if, like I say, it just felt a bit filler to me, and because you because you don't really know if there's any kind of after effects of the crash, or you don't really know how injured he is properly, and you don't know if any other marshals might have been injured or something like that. It all just felt still a little bit raw, and if if people were after a bit of filler, there were other aspects of the start to analyze. There was Valtteri's poor getaway. One of McLaren's lost his front wing. It felt like they were sort of clinging onto the entertainment aspect of it.
Yeah, that's a good point about we don't know the injuries that he might have internally. Someone made the point to me on Twitter that what if he'd had, say, internal bleeding or hemorrhaging, or God forbid he died in hospital last night, like, say, Alan Donoghue did in 1975 after his crash at the Österreich-Ring. Or who was the other example? Ronnie Peterson, Monza in 1978, lived for hours after the crash and died of a blood embolism in hospital hours later. So there was still that possibility. But it's just very difficult, I suppose, in terms of where do you draw the line in terms of Liberty Media. They're an entertainment company. And I obviously over the last few years we've seen the effect that's had on Formula One. They very much treat the sport as an entertainment product compared to what Bernie Ecclestone did with CVC as an investment company. So Liberty are very clearly trying to align this, trying to blur the lines basically between sport and entertainment. And that's where the gladiator analogy comes into play, because while the drivers are sportsmen, they're also there for entertainment purposes. So I think it was obvious that Liberty Media were going to try cashing in as much as possible on the crash and show it as often as they possibly could on the footage once it became evident that Romain was okay. But that could have backfired. It doesn't look like it's going to, but it could have backfired if, say, Romain had some internal injuries. Like, he went through a 53G impact. That, it's not a minor crash. The car came to rest almost instantaneously upon hitting the barrier. That's a huge force to put through a human body. And he could have had a brain injury. He could have had, the heart internals. Things could have gone wrong, and Liberty Media couldn't have known for certain that one of those issues mightn't arise in hospital hours later. So
I think they were just sort of, pandering. Pandering is the wrong word, but um, entertaining the people that would have wanted to see it over and over again. And those people would have probably already by now rewound their live TV to go back to the crash, or found a recorded video on YouTube of it, someone recording the coverage or something. It's not like there wouldn't have been any kind of other sources for people to you know excessively watch this crash.
Yeah, I'm in two minds about it. I can see both sides of the argument. I think Liberty Media, on this occasion, they were fine from the making the decisions, obviously, under Liberty Media instruction. But I personally don't have a problem with showing replays once the condition of the driver is known. But that obviously carries the caveat of what happens if something happens later on in the hospital. But I think that's a set of circumstances that you can't tell. It could be days, it could be months. Like, let's use the example of Maria De Villota, who died a year after her accident. Now, I know the accident that she had wasn't at a test or a public, a televised event, when she crashed the Marussia into the back of a truck back in 2013, 2012, I think, when Maria De Villota had her crash. But she died as a result of that accident. But it took a year for it to happen. So if the footage of her accident existed, it would have been shown on television.
Yes. And, I don't think anybody's calling for a complete blackout of any kind of bad crash ever, because, like I said, we all want, we're an information-driven species. We want to know these things. We want to, know how they survived, and yeah, I don't think I'm calling for any kind of, blackout of any bad crash. It was just, just say again, it just felt a tad too much.
I think the ideal situation would have been to wait maybe a little bit longer than they did, get the information out there that Roman was okay, maybe show some shots of him in the medical car, shots around the impact, without showing the crash itself, until maybe, I don't know, half an hour later, maybe minimum, once, tension had dissipated a little bit, and then maybe show it in a factual light. Don't try to sensationalize it too much, but maybe just show the replay once or twice on the live feed, and then just go, right, now let's get our heads back in the game. Would that have been a better scenario for you?
Possibly, yeah. Like I say, I've got no issue seeing the replays, but a dozen times, that doesn't need to happen.
No, I'd agree. I'd say show the replay once or twice, move on.
Yeah, move on, but wait for more information.
Yeah. Well, luckily, anyway, Roman is okay, and apparently he's been discharged from hospital tomorrow. But I do think it's going to kick off a little bit more debate, and I'd like to eventually find out FOM's editorial decision regarding what they show on screen. Because it's not publicly known what those editorial decisions are. It's obvious what they chose in, say, the case of Antoine Hubert at Spa last year. No replay was ever shown. There was obviously the live footage of the initial crash footage, but nothing was ever shown after that on the world feed. So there's obviously a decision there that was made, and I think it's an honourable decision and the right decision. In the case of Roman's crash, when it became obvious that he was okay and he was out of the car and the medical staff were with him, then I wouldn't have a problem with showing the replay. But as you say, maybe showing it a little bit too often. But I saw a point being made on Twitter where people were saying that it could be a generational thing, where people who remember, say, the graphic footage of Senna and Ratzenberger and their lifeless bodies being shown on television in the live broadcast of San Marino in 1994, people who saw that don't seem to have been fazed at all by what we saw yesterday. Well, say the newer generation of fans who've come up quite young. Formula One is attracting a younger demographic these days, so maybe the younger people who haven't been exposed to that level of graphic reality that has happened in the sport in the past, and feel a greater connection to the drivers of nowadays, are almost like peers, and they're more accessible because they're on Twitter and social media and all like that. Do you think that has had any effect on the general reaction to the replays?
I don't think so, because even though we're talking about the younger generations, they're probably exposed to a wider range of footage of, all sorts of things. They've probably already seen various clips of kind of, aeroplane crashes and all sorts of, explosive kind of things previously. So
you wouldn't have the emotional connection to that, though, the way you would, say, with an F1 driver who you follow religiously on social media.
No, that's true. So yeah, it probably does hit home a little bit more in that sense. But yeah, it's a tough one. I don't think. I think I'll just go back to my same point of we all want to kind of know the information about the crash to know what's happened. Probably the harsher thing is not knowing at all. But obviously, still show the crash when it's confirmed that he's okay. But I don't know. Maybe it's just one of those things where Formula One fans, if you follow the sport for long enough, you do eventually get reminders that it is, motor racing is dangerous. It always has been and probably always will, and it's probably at that point where you see something like that for the first time, and you decide whether or not you want to keep pursuing it as an interest. It's something that's, I'm sure there have been people who saw Senna's crash live and were completely horrified to see it and didn't want to have anything to do with this barbaric sport ever again. But you won't hear from them on Twitter because they've completely left the sport alone. You'll only hear from the ones who are defending it and saying I was there and are still here because they want to tell the story. So
yeah, that's true. And I think everyone can be glad that the TV direction has moved away from that. Those lingering shots from the helicopter over Senna's Williams, where they didn't shy away from showing anything like that. And even more graphically, Roland Ratzenberger's crash in qualifying, where you were shown high definition footage of a man dying in a car. And I'm very glad that Formula One has moved away from that, and they are trying to be considerate and be more respectful of the drivers. But as you say, I think yesterday was a grim reminder of these guys are not characters in a TV show. These are not... you can be a fan of a driver, but they are sports people. This is not, even though it's packaged as an entertainment product, it's a sport first and foremost, and there are risks involved in what they do. And while yesterday Romain Grosjean walked away from his crash, he just as easily might not have. And that risk applies to all of them. It applies to Lando Norris, it applies to Lewis Hamilton, it applies to Sebastian Vettel, it applies to the most social media friendly driver, and to the guys who are considerably older and avoid social media completely. It's a sport, and it's a dangerous one, and I I think maybe sometimes people do forget that, and I think yesterday was a very, very stark reminder of it.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. It's like I say, these seem to happen every now and again. These reminders, and yeah, yeah. This was one of them. This was a big reminder.
Yeah. We could talk about the crash and the fallout from it all day, and I think there will be still quite a bit to pick out of it when the FIA investigation comes out, because they've confirmed that they are investigating the accident, and that's a good thing. That's always a good thing, because it means there's something to be learned from it, and the FIA have proven that they're good at learning from stuff that has happened in the past, and that's the reason why Roman Grosjean is still with us. Now, the FIA are not infallible. We've seen stuff happening like the marshal running across the track yesterday. Michael Massey explained that the marshals were told not to run across the track. There's not a whole lot you can really do if the marshals decide to ignore that instruction. But we saw it in qualifying in Turkey and Imola, where cars were sent out on track with recovery vehicles on track and marshals on track. So the FIA are not completely infallible in that regard. But in terms of the safety of the cars and the equipment and everything like that, the work they're doing is very impressive, and all they need to do is tighten up on procedural stuff a little bit more. And I think that's an area where Michael Massey needs to focus a little bit more on, because I don't think those would have happened under Charlie Whiting.
No, and it was a scary moment. You saw the marshal running across the track, and you could tell it was far too early, because the safety car, I think, had only just been called out, so maybe they kind of took that as the cue to go, and just assumed that all cars would have seen the sign, and would have already slowed down. But it's it's not often the case, because quite often drivers are rushing back to the pits to try and tweak strategy, or it's coming for a tire change, and it's still a live racing track, and and I remember thinking at the time that somebody needs to be given a good telling off for that, and whoever either gave the call or of their own accord needs to have a real strict punishment, just for their own sake, and and I don't want I don't want people to sort of hide behind some sort of um, you know uh, marshals are there for us. They can't, we have to hold them in this kind of high regard. We do hold them in this high regard, because they're volunteers who give up their time to make the sport run. But at the same time, when they've done, if they've done something incredibly stupid, they need to be called out, and they need to be given some real stern words, and in some cases punishment, because you can't have that type of daft behavior on a track. And I don't know if the FIA just need to bring in some sort of vetting procedure beforehand, some sort of I don't know, some sort of test, or qualification, or something, to some kind of check, just to make sure they're getting somebody who's going to be able to behave in the right way, and respond correctly, because it's not just their life they're risking, they're risking the safety of the people who are out on track. And I don't don't know, maybe they make the move towards having uh, permanent full-time marshals, because it's always relied on volunteers. Maybe they change that. Maybe it becomes an actual profession.
Profession, where you actually can be a professional marshal and be paid for it, traveling with Formula One around the world. Yeah,
But maybe that in itself relies on too much insurance, or I don't know what the reasons are for not doing it. But
it's
maybe
probably just
we've seen
sheer numbers, the amount you'd require.
quite possibly. But Formula One cannot be seen to have these instances where there's near misses. We saw it at Imola. I remember seeing it at Monaco last year, where was it a racing point coming out of the pits, and
Yeah,
it's far too often, and something bad is going to go wrong with it, and it needs to be seriously addressed now.
True Nerd says, so you're telling me a driver is trapped in a burning car and the marshal who chooses to run to save the guy should be punished? No, it's not that
No,
incident.
no.
It's the Sergio Perez incident.
Yeah, this was later on when Perez was able to just get out of a burning car freely, and the marshal ran across the circuit, a live racing circuit that had only just gone under safety car conditions, um, and he chose to run off. There's even a clip of Lando Norris commenting, that's some brave marshal, and the team got on the radio, said, oh, more like stupid or something like that. So no, this isn't the Grosjean incident. That the procedures there were followed, you know, uh, to the point. Things were no issue, no issue with that. It was marshals running across the track way before they were allowed to,
Yeah.
for whatever reason. I'm not, you know, I think did you say Massey was basically saying the marshal decided to run across and he wasn't given the.
Yeah, Michael Massey said the marshal that ran across to Sergio Perez's car hadn't been given the all clear, and they were specifically told not to cross the track, which is also the same with Roman Grosjean's crash. The marshal who did the majority of the extinguishing also ran across the track, but in his situation, the track had been neutralised. They were under red flag conditions, and all the cars had passed at that point. So. It's not quite the same as running across a live track, because that issue with Perez and the marshal running across the track there, that could very easily have ended up like the South African Grand Prix in '77, where Tom Price ran into a marshal. What was his name? Jansen van Vuren, I think was his name, and both of them were killed as a result of that. So it's not something to be messed around with, and. Okay, nothing bad happened as a result of it, but that marshal does need to be pulled aside and just go, what was your thinking there? Were you... Maybe Grosjean's accident and seeing what had happened earlier affected his mindset and his thinking, and he responded just a little bit too silly, in a silly way, but brave at the same time.
Quite possibly. And the marshal who ran across the track is probably well aware now of what happened, and is probably deeply sorry that he did it.
He was only trying to help.
Absolutely.
His heart was completely in the right place.
And to be a marshal in the first place, your heart needs to be in the right place, to even take on such responsibility, because it is still a dangerous job. But there still has to be, I think ultimately all I'm saying is we've seen far too many incidents where there's a marshal on the track that shouldn't be there. And I'm not saying that it's always the marshal's fault, because we don't know. We can't account for all the incidents and say that it's the fault of person X, Y, or Z. It's just from an outsider looking in. there's been far too many incidents of marshals being on track, and if it doesn't stop, there's scope for it to go badly wrong.
Yeah, and the one thing is, I do think Michael Massey needs to hold his hands up on occasion and admit to making a mistake. Michael has been, he's doing a great job overall, I think. He's taken over the mantle from Charlie Whiting. The job was kind of forced upon him a little bit at short notice, and he's responded pretty well. But you still get the impression sometimes that he's learning on the job. And we see incidents like the drain cover in Azerbaijan last year. We see the drain covers in Mugello at the Tuscan Grand Prix. There's incidents with marshals on track. There's incidents with recovery vehicles on track. And in every occasion, Michael has had some sort of explanation as to why it's not his fault. And I think Michael just needs to go sometimes, okay, you're right, I made a bad call there. Just admit that he's still learning from his mistakes and maybe will do better next time. He's not doing a bad job, but there are areas in which he has let standards slip compared to what Charlie Whiting would have done. And I think if he just held his hands up and just say, look, I'm doing as good a job as I can, and I don't have the experience that Charlie Whiting had, but I'm getting better and I'm working on it and I'm addressing it, and I will make better calls with more experience in these high pressure scenarios. But every time Michael Massey is just going, here is the reason why I'm not to blame, or why the FIA are not to blame. And I think that's one area where Michael could be a lot better.
I'm not sure. I mean, it's. I mean, have we had any instances where there's been something that's happened on a couple of occasions and it quite obviously being a fault of the FIA, or are we only seeing things once?
What do you mean?
As in, have we seen a sort of a repetition of problems?
Seeing marshals on track or recovery vehicles on track when the session's green.
Yeah, I mean, I think the vehicle still being on track is maybe that's a little bit of a kind of Steward 101 kind of error. I think that one was that one was probably a little bit silly, and I don't know. We've just got to hope that there's whoever he's reporting to is probably aware of these instances, and maybe he just needs an advisor or two putting in place just to kind of help spot things, because it's an entire Formula One weekend. There's got to be little elements that are hard to pick up on for anybody. I mean, it was a sterling job that the late Charlie Whiting did in that role, and maybe just more people involved might just help pick up on these things.
Yeah, I sometimes get the impression Michael is more concerned about keeping to schedule, or maybe he has taskmasters breathing in his ear. Sometimes he seems to make calls that just prioritise timekeeping as opposed to the overall safety of the session. And again, I think that might be down to experience. Charlie Whiting was exceptionally experienced at running a Grand Prix weekend. He had 23 years under his belt as permanent race starter and race director and head of safety for 20 years for the FIA. He was extremely accomplished in that regard, and as we saw yesterday, his legacy has continued beyond his death to save lives. So I think Michael just needs to sometimes just be a little bit more patient, a little bit more conscious of the enormous responsibility on his shoulders, And I have no doubt that when he is doing the job for 23 years, he will be every bit as competent as Charlie Whiting was. So I'd be prepared to forgive him the occasional gaffe, but I think he does need to come down like a ton of bricks on the marshals. Not to punish them, but just literally go kind of like, that stupid thing you did yesterday running across the track when the session was live, don't do it again, you idiot. But thank you very much for helping us. So I'd give Michael the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, yeah, I'd agree with that.
So I don't think there's anything. The race itself was pretty nondescript, to be honest. Hamilton ran away with it. We saw the Red Bulls coming in second and third, not able to keep pace with Hamilton. Bottas had his usual Bottas race where bad luck happened. He fell to the back of the grid and spent a while picking his way back through the grid. But overall, it was a pretty nondescript race, really, after we actually got the race underway.
Yeah, it didn't quite materialize into anything, into any kind of close fight. You always had the impression that that Hamilton was able to keep Verstappen at kind of arm's length. Even Verstappen kind of trying to switch up the tyre strategy a little bit didn't really work, and in the end he just kind of went for a bit of an alternate tactic of going for the fastest lap and putting on fresh tyres for if there was a late safety car, which there was, but there wasn't anything to really gain from it because it was too near to the end of the race. So Red Bull, unable to really compete with Mercedes at this on this occasion. It was what Red Bull's first double podium finish since Japan 17, was it? Was that what
Was it
the
that
stat
long
was?
ago?
I think 2017 is the year. I can't remember the exact race. I think it was mentioned that it was Japan.
Yeah, and well done to Alex Albon. He wasn't quite as off the pace as he has been at other races, and was there to pick up the pieces when Sergio Perez had his misfortune with a few laps to go. You have to feel very sorry for Sergio Perez at the moment.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, he's. I mean, it's become, everyone's kind of getting closer to the mindset of he's probably going to be without a drive for next season. There's a good chance he'll be taking a sabbatical in 2021, and just to kind of add insult to the bad news injury, he's robbed of a podium with I don't even know what the problem was. Something went bang in the power unit, and it was a desperately unlucky result for him because he'd driven brilliantly. He'd been able to keep Albon at bay. Alex wasn't able to get anywhere near to him, Perez thoroughly deserved a podium out of that.
Perez has been one of my drivers of the season.
Yeah, and it makes it even more criminal that, well, if he doesn't end up on the grid in 2021, because it's still an if technically, then it'll be a big shame. And we've been saying this for weeks, but
yeah, he said that it's sabbatical more likely, but he's basically begging Red Bull at this stage, please let me into that seat along with Max. But it's looking more and more likely that Red Bull are going to side with probably sticking with Alex. He's just been signed up as a Wings for Life ambassador, which is a Red Bull charity, so he's not likely to have done that if he's on his way out the door of Red Bull completely in 2 weeks' time. So you would imagine that he's been kept on in some shape or form, whether it's AlphaTauri or Red Bull. We'll just have to wait and see. But when you see second and third Perez holding off Albon with ease, you have to wonder whether Christian Horner or Helmut Marko are sitting there just kind of going, look, he has the measure of our guy. He would be a brilliant backup for Max next year. Let's put Perez in that second Red Bull. And I think Sergio so deserves that opportunity at this point. He's driving so well, and sitting a year off at this stage in his career is criminal with the talent and the level he's at now.
Yeah, definitely. And the one thing I will say about the Red Bull Academy, or the Red Bull drivers, is that even though even if they do sign Alex on for another season, it's it's still no guarantee that he'll do the complete season, because I wouldn't put it past Red Bull to not only kind of swap their Red Bull and Toro Rosso drivers around, but to just terminate a contract, just to say you're out of the seat regardless. I'd still add that it probably doesn't mean that Alex, if he is signed for 2021, it probably doesn't mean that he's safe for the entirety of 2021, but it just means that they're going to start the season with him.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, actually. Yeah, it's a good point.
So maybe a sabbatical for Perez may, yeah, he could still eventually get some kind of seat out of it if a driver isn't performing.
Yeah, I don't think Sergio is gone. I don't think his F1 career is over if he doesn't have a seat in 2021. But we just might have to sit. He might just have to sit out the year, just with no open stable for him.
No, and it's a cruel sport.
It is, especially when you see Sebastian Vettel pathetically driving around in 15th place and spinning helplessly out of position. But when you see the footage of that spin that he had early in the second part of the race, it's such a silly spin, and not silly in terms of I think Sebastian's doing anything wrong. When you look at the footage, he's well out of the exit of the corner. He's at the point where the aero of the car should be compensating for the demands of the grip he's asking, and it's just simply not there. The car he complained about it being undrivable. He got the better of Charles Leclerc in qualifying, and then the very next day he was probably the worst driver on the grid. There's something just not clicking there, and it's sad to see, but I just hope that form doesn't carry on to Racing Point and Perez is put out of a seat for a driver that's past his best. I personally don't think Vettel is past his best. I think there's something going on that's preventing him from unlocking his potential. When you see the onboard footage of Charles and Sebastian, I think the two cars are handling completely differently. But maybe that's the conspiracy theorist in me talking. So I'm interested to see what happens, and I just hope Racing Point haven't made the wrong choice.
Well, that remains to be seen. I still think it's almost criminal that Perez is not in one of those seats for next season, and maybe Sebastian is just a driver who can just unlock something when he knows he's in with a shout of a podium or a victory. He drove incredibly well in at the Turkish Grand Prix.
Everyone was spinning except Sebastian in Turkey.
Yeah, so maybe it's whilst he may be putting in all the effort and all the procedures and all the time necessary with all his engineers and stuff, maybe there's just something, maybe being a 4-time champion, maybe there's just something subconsciously that just can't unlock the full potential of himself when he knows it's for 13th or something.
The footage of that spin, the onboard with the team radio, I thought was pretty illuminating. You see Vettel losing control. I think he was in like 5th or 6th gear. He's accelerating, he's straightening out the car. He's probably doing about 140, 150 miles an hour, and all of a sudden the rear of the car just goes. It doesn't look like he's got wheel spin. It doesn't look like there's anything wrong. It just all of a sudden the back of the car just comes around. It's such an amateur looking error, and it's not one that I think Vettel, no matter how bad he is, maybe in terms of mindset at the moment, I don't think it's an error that a driver of Formula One level should be making. But what I thought was particularly telling was he got on the team radio and actually laughed about the spin. He laughed and said the car is undrivable. So if he's laughing about how bad the car is, that to me says that he's just mentally going, what the hell am I even driving?
There may be things that come out about his final year with Ferrari in years to come, but it just doesn't seem to add up, whether it's, how much of it is Vettel, and I do think some of it is genuinely Leclerc coming to terms with Vettel and frequently having the measure of him these days, but not in that kind of night and day kind of scenario we saw in Bahrain. There was something extra wasn't quite right there, and it'll be for someone who's got far more knowledge than me to be able to work that one out.
Yeah, I like Vettel's a classy guy. I'm just hoping that he doesn't decide I'm going to remain completely silent about my final year at Ferrari, because that does seem to be the kind of guy that he is. I hope that Vettel brings out his bitchy side next year when he's free of the Ferrari contract and he's free to talk. I hope that he is able to just reveal some of what's going on this year, because I don't believe for a second that a 4-time world champion can just go from where he was in 2018, 2019, where he was still highly competent. Yes, there's mistakes here and there, but he didn't look outright incompetent. This year, Vettel appears to be, if he was a rookie, you would write him off. You would say that this guy is not getting a second year. That's how poor Vettel has been this season. He has just been absolutely demolished by Charles Leclerc. He had one good race in Turkey where he had the measure in oddly the trickiest part of the year, where finesse in the rain mattered, and aero grip wasn't quite as important as mechanical grip. It seems to be a fundamental issue with the way the Ferrari drives and Vettel's driving style. It isn't working. And it's strange that Vettel couldn't keep control of the car on the ultra dry tarmac of Sakir, yet in Turkey, in the rain, on that really, really slippery, oily, greasy surface, Vettel drove like the world champion we know he is. That to me is just, the juxtaposition of that is too weird. I think something is fundamentally not right, and I hope that if there is games being played behind the scenes, that Vettel next year will reveal what exactly was going on.
Maybe he's waiting for the opportunity to release a book.
I'd read it.
Maybe he's keeping the stories in there, like Lewis Hamilton is. Yeah.
Unfortunately, I don't think Hamilton will have quite as much drama, because generally his years have been pretty quiet, really. The Rosberg year, I think, with 2016, I'd like to read about. And
that's the big one.
That's the big one, yeah. And maybe the year with Alonso as well in 2007, when he was the rookie as opposed to the seasoned, experienced champion that he is now. But yeah, Hamilton and a Vettel book, that I'd read them.
Oh yeah. I'd say most championship winning drivers are probably worth reading their autobiography.
Apart from Kimi Räikkönen's.
I haven't read that one.
It's not great, to be honest.
Not?
No,
it's because it's translated, or is it?
No, it's just written in a really, really strange style, and it's just a strange book. There's a couple of interesting bits and bobs in it that are pretty interesting, but overall I think for learning about his McLaren years, the Mark Priestley book, or the mechanic book about the McLaren years with Raikkonen, I think that was overall far more interesting than Raikkonen's autobiography, which is a pity, because I think Kimi has some great stories to tell, but he just doesn't see he doesn't have the head for drama. So I don't think he really revealed them in his book. So hopefully Sebastian Vettel does bring out his inner bitch and is willing to let loose when he's free of Ferrari. I would love to see what he has to say. What's hidden away under all those layers.
Side question: what's the best driver's autobiography you've read?
Jenson Button's is pretty good. Really enjoyed that, but Jackie Stewart's as well. I'm just looking over at some of the ones I have over there, but Mark Webber's, I think, was very good. He's a pretty honest guy. He spoke about his relationship with Sebastian Vettel in the Red Bull years, and he didn't hold back. He was angry, obviously, about Vettel and the way he was treated, but at the same time, he was respectful of Vettel's abilities. And I'd say probably Mark Webber's book, closely followed by Jenson Button. They were willing to reveal more of the behind-the-scenes stuff, and that made them good reads. But Kimi Räikkönen's is just not really worth the read. Which is a shame.
For me, I really enjoyed Damon Hill's book.
Now there's one I would not have selected as a possibility.
It was, you see, I think some autobiographies can maybe be a little bit formulaic in that it's, you know, I'm a driver from humble beginnings and we worked really hard to get to where we are, and you know, and it kind of builds up like that. Whereas it's kind of the opposite with Damon. It kind of becomes a bit of a, you know, he's obviously kind of spent a lot of his younger years in his father's shadow, and it was kind of dealing with that, and obviously the tragedy of his father's death, and you know, him eventually kind of, you know, starting a late motor racing career, and then it was just different, really, and it was quite goes quite a bit into the kind of mental side as well. I thought it was quite surprisingly fascinating.
Well, I'll make a point of rooting that one out and have a read of it. I want to say hello to Carlos Armando, who's watching on. Just speaking about the Marshal, he said he saw how severe the incident was with Grosjean, then saw the fire from Checo's car and wanted to act upon it faster than he should have. That's in relation to the Marshal with Perez and running across the track. And Carlos also says R.I.P. Charlie. So, we're talking for nearly 90 minutes, Luke. So I think we should probably leave it there. There's a lot more we could talk about, but I think we can save it for another day. We've got Sakir again this weekend, so we'll do another live stream in a few days' time, sure, and we'll catch up on all the other talking points from Formula One at the moment. Thanks for joining me on the stream.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me. If
you want to follow Luke on Twitter, he is at Lucas Murph, and I'm at Thomas Marr on F1 as well on Twitter. If you want to follow the two of us. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk about all things Sakir Grand Prix very soon. Thanks very much for tuning in.